Predicting the future. As a stock market investor, I recently had an interesting discussion with one of my personal friends that knows nothing about finance, has never read a balance sheet or even bought a stock. And I was trying to explain to him in a really refined manner what I do specifically. And I said, look, I want you to name one thing right now that you think is going to be huge in the near-term future. And it didn't take him too long to come up with an answer. And he said, I don't know, virtual reality. And I said, okay, that's real easy. Take that knowledge now and go find all the companies forefronting virtual reality, which ironically is Facebook, which is still an incredible stock to buy. Is they're forefronting Oculus, they're getting into augmented reality as well. And if you think that future is coming and it's going to be that big of a future, then you just start placing bets in those directions. So what I want to do in this video is I want to expand on this topic, talk about a bunch of different sectors, my personal 5 to 10 year predictions on them, and then I'm going to weight this into the S&P 500 and show you something that is being so broadly overlooked and where the future of the S&P is likely going to be. But the first thing we have to do here, folks, is I want to show you how my portfolio is set up. This is my $300,000 technically dividend stock portfolio, but I'm leveraging it into sectors that I still believe are going to have massive impacts on how we live in the future. But I don't want to focus right now on the individual holdings. I want to show you my sector allocation and how I've set this up because I really practice what I preach. And what we can see here is 28% of my portfolio is leveraged in the tech sector. I'm calling this the growth sector of my portfolio. But ironically, as I started building this sector out, I noticed that the VOO that represents the S&P 500 has 27% being the top 10 holdings of Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Berkshire, Tesla, Nvidia, and JP Morgan. That 28% weighting in my portfolio consists of Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Tesla, and a hint of Bitcoin, which ironically at Bitcoin's market cap would likely be sitting in the top 10 weighting here. So it's really interesting that my portfolio largely resembles the S&P 500 to varying degrees. And the other half of my portfolio isn't made up by companies that are on those weightings. I've handpicked companies in a variety of sectors, which we're going to talk about in a sec. But I also want to point out the fact that for the first time in roughly the last year, the S&P 500 PE has been pulling back thanks to some of the recent earnings in these tech giants that make up the larger weighting of the S&P 500. We are now sitting at a PE of 34, which is starting to become range bound again, which is really healthy for this market. And even considering it looks like we are heading into what could potentially be a new wave of this pandemic, the volatility index has just flatlined, which only does better for long-term investors in the near term as well, because this will offer more stability behind the growth of the market. So you're not looking at like 5% mood swings every day in your portfolio here, folks. But putting that aside, let me talk about these individual sectors, and then I'm going to come back to talking about the broader market here. But predicting the future in your portfolio is a really simple task, especially if you don't understand how to read a balance sheet. And a lot of the things I've been talking about, guys, that you need to be leveraged into is AI and machine learning. This is going to change everything from healthcare and genomics to self-driving to even hell, the McDonald's drive-through. This is going to integrate into almost every aspect of your life. And it's a shame that only these top tier companies like your Amazons, your Microsofts, your Googles are really leveraging this right now, which if you believe that self-driving and automation is going to be huge in the future with robotics, it would seem foolish to have no exposure to the companies that are forefronting that technology. Another huge sector of my portfolio, renewables. Now, I caught on to this one super early. One of the first investments I made a fortune on that one as well, being Northland Power, but it was quite apparent that 5 years ago, the Canadian government started introducing carbon tax, all of these new green emission policies. So it just seems foolish knowing that and knowing that's still the future we're headed toward at a rapid rate to not be leveraging into companies that are getting into the renewables. Another sector, guys, space travel. Now, this one a lot harder to be leveraging right now because it's still in the infant stages compared to AI that is already starting to prove some technology and income with something like Microsoft Azure that already makes billions of dollars. But the space industry is going to change the entire commodities market. When we're talking precious metals, minerals, and gold is the most refined, simplest example. We know this stuff is readily available in space. It has just never been economically possible to go and get it where the numbers would make sense. But thanks to the evolution in the private sector of space travel, this reality is coming quicker than people think. And I'm highly confident in the next 5 to 10 years because of the access to space, it is going to rock, no pun intended, the commodities market and how we look at minerals and precious metals. Renewables. This one I'm still a little more patient on because a lot of the companies I've tried to invest that were well poised to take advantage of satellite infrastructure and things of that nature, they're too new, going through growing cycles, and have a lot of SEC regulations coming down on them. So you can get poised through this even with AI and a few other industries. But unfortunately, I wish SpaceX was public because I'm not an accredited investor and I couldn't buy their last funding round in March. But this is a sector people severely underlook, as we are going back to the moon in just a couple years here, folks. So let's talk about one more sector, being the blockchain. Now, I know a lot of people are extremely on the fence when it comes to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but you need to really learn how the blockchain works because it is going to be integrating in every aspect of the financial system in the coming 5 to 10 years. The Federal Reserve already stated that they want to start their own stable coin, basically through some form of a blockchain. China is partnering with Ant Group, I think Tencent as well, to start building out their own technology of blockchain for their currency. So they're not competing with this decentralized currency, but I honestly believe that blockchain is going to revolutionize the art industry, the way we buy music, sporting game tickets, and it's just a lot of other things in between. And I'm not going to explain it much farther in this video, but this is a technology that is already built up into a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And at this point, it is too big to overlook when literal governments are now talking about integrating it. So putting the next 5 to 10 years in a basket, what does it mean to me? It means that we are in a technological revolution that we haven't seen since the Industrial Revolution, and it is leading to the greatest returns in stock market history. And I'm going to simplify this in a lot of different ways, but I think it's become quite apparent that we are heading into a technological jump across every sector, whether it's financials, healthcare, space, the auto industry, drones. All of this stuff is going to be integrating into our daily lives much quicker than I think people can even become aware of, at an exponential rate. And understanding this starts to make a lot of sense when we look at the S&P 500 over the last, say, 20 to 30 years, because since the 2008 financial crisis, this technological revolution only just recently kicked off. And we can see because of that, the average rate of return in the market has been roughly 20%. And the primary reason behind this is because those top 27% of the weightings in most of the indexes are the companies that are forefronting these technologies. And I really believe the technologies they created, 10, 20 years ago just started to come into its full fruition. But the second half of this technological jump is just starting to happen now, which leads me to think that the market is not overvalued here. I think we're going to see a continued growth rate for the next 5 to 10 years, where I wouldn't be surprised, bold statement, not a financial advisor, if the S&P doubles or triples again. And I believe this is going to be the last huge major jump in the market. And I don't know how long this is going to last. It could easily be for the next 10 to 20 years, but I wouldn't be surprised as once we get over this and everything bakes into society, this opportunity will be gone for an extended period of time, just like the Industrial Revolution, because once you get this technology, there's no new technology to replace it for quite a period of time, and typically almost half a generation to a generation. So when you look at your overall portfolio here, it is really simple to take advantage of this and make sure your portfolio is leveraged in a way to capitalize on all of this, because the vast majority of my utility sectors and renewables, the vast majority of my tech is forefronting all of these new technologies. I have more exposure now to healthcare than I did in the past. If you believe healthcare is going to continue to expand and be prevalent because of the pandemic, like, these things are just common sense to me, but it's quite apparent that if you're brand new to the market, you might not be aware of these situations. You might not have had as much time to take a look at what is evolving, but luckily I've been in this market now for several years. I've done very successfully, outperforming the market consistently now, and I want to pass the question off to you. What do you think is going to be huge in the future? How are you leveraging it in your portfolio to take advantage of this today? So in light of all this, stay cool, stay awesome, and I look forward to catching you tomorrow.